Welcome to Retail's Most Wanted, the podcast that examines the latest issues related to organized retail crime and how retailers and policymakers are fighting against today's organized crime syndicates. I'm your host, Marty Carpenter. He's Dave Studdert, a founding partner at LVT. And coming up on today's show, Dave, we got a great guest. We're going to be joined by Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares. But before we get to that, Dave, I want to go back in time to yesteryear when I was a professional sportscaster and you were a college baseball player, a catcher, if I've got that right.
Yep, that's
right.
right.
All right, you know a thing or two about protecting the plate. Let's take a look at this video because I don't know if you've seen this or not, but this is athleticism and ORC overlapping in a perfect Venn diagram. We've got a guy in a grocery store trying to make his way out. Security guard's doing his part. He's going to block the plate here. What do you think about his technique on the blocking of the plate?
Super impressive.
Hey, he's holding him in there. And, if you think about it in the baseball terms, there's a ball into left field, and now the outfielder's going to send it home, and boom! Right off the head. That's a great shot to the middle. First of all, the accuracy here. What do you got for me on the accuracy?
It's not his first time tossing a 2-liter of Coke.
No, and with the two-handed overhand, and if you watch this closely when he goes down, and we'll show it here again, his head hits on the cart, boom, boom, and then onto the ground. So it's sort of 3 headshots all in one.
Wow.
Look, we look at this and say, first of all, kudos to the security guard and kudos to the other guy throwing the 2-liter bottle. But generally, it's not advised to try to make a stop here.
Not advised, right? And most retailers really they look poorly upon this type of activity. But these are the things where safety's first, right? Life safety. So not advised. Good shot, but not advised.
And one of the things we hear from a lot of attorneys general and others, experts, security experts who've been on the show with this, is that it feels wrong to let them get away, but know that they're not necessarily getting away, in part because there are cameras out there that are watching this.
Exactly. Right. There's plenty of tools we use to find these perpetrators and the criminals. So if it happens to you, put the Coke back in the cooler.
Unless you've got an arm like that guy, then go for it.
Present shot.
Right. Okay. Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares is up next, right after this break. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with the Attorney General Alliance, where U.S. state attorneys general collaborate on emerging legal issues and the rule of law at home and across borders. Learn more at agalliance.com. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with LVT, securing physical environments through intelligent automation. Learn more at lvt.com. That's lvt.com. Attorney General Jason Miyares is the first Hispanic American to be elected to a statewide office in Virginia and the first child of an immigrant to serve as Attorney General. Since his inauguration back in January of 2022, his focus has been on fighting violent crime and improving public safety, strengthening economic growth, and combating the deadly impact of opioids and fentanyl, and protecting Virginians from corporate misconduct. General Miyares, thanks so much for spending some time with us today on Retail's Most Wanted.
It's great to be with you all. Thanks so much for having me.
I want to get into ORC-related news, but first, I just think your family history, your biography is so interesting with your roots in Cuba, and I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit about your background and what led you to this position as Attorney General.
Gosh, well, I would say that, I'm the first child of immigrant, as you noted, ever elected this position, so I like to say if your family came to this country seeking hope and opportunity, your family's a lot like my family. And I love to say America is a nation of second chances. It gave the Miyares family a second chance. So my mother fled Cuba as a homeless, penniless 19-year-old teenager. She literally did not know where her next meal was going to come from. She got on an airplane in the fall of 1965. And almost 50 years to the day that she left the country with no consent of the governed. In the fall of 2015, she was able to walk into a voting booth and get a ballot and vote for me to represent her in the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia House of Delegates. It's what I call the American miracle. It happens almost every day in this country, which is individuals that have fled unbelievable both tyranny or oppression or lack of opportunity are able to see, not just for themselves, but also for their children, to achieve things that they would never have thought possible in just a single generation. It is why I think President Lincoln described this country as the last best hope on earth. And we often hear when you turn on the news, everything that's wrong with America. And I think it's important to celebrate what's right with America. And indeed, the fact that we are that last best hope on earth, that we are giving those second chances, I think is testimony to the remarkable resiliency of who we are as a people. And it's why I'm so grateful to be in the position I'm in. And I tell my daughters all the time that gratitude's the most underrated of human traits, and ingratitude is the ugliest, but gratitude is the most underrated. And I have such gratitude for what this country has provided, that second chance. And so it's great to be with you all, but thanks for asking.
Thank you, General. Phenomenal story. And in gratitude, we agree. We're grateful for that you're here this morning, and willing to talk to us about some of the challenges with organized retail crime. This year in Virginia, there was new legislation enacted specifically around those involved with organized retail theft. Felony charges, upwards of 20-year sentences. Were there any specific challenges or issues related to organized retail crime, specifically in Virginia, that prompted the need for legislative change?
Well, I mean, I think you have you had a problem just nationally. You've always had billions of dollars that have been stolen. In Virginia alone is 1.3 billion. So that's 1.3 billion dollars that is being passed on to law-abiding customers. And so it is a problem when it is the law breaking we're able to get away with it. And it's the law abiding that are being punished for it. So that's 1.3 billion that is being passed on to customers. That means that every time you go into a store, you go into a drugstore, you go any type of retail store, you're paying more because they're covering the cost for somebody that's the law breaking. $1.3 billion worth of loss in merchandise stolen is translated to about $80 million in tax revenue lost to the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's $80 million that could go to your school district. $80 million that could go to roads. $80 million that could go to pay for law enforcement. $80 million that could go to teachers. That is $80 million that is not being used to improve Virginia. And so it has been a problem in where we are. And these are not stealing to survive scenarios. These are scenarios of people that are oftentimes tied to organized criminal elements that are using it as well. So we had the challenge going into this, saying that we were having a huge hit to our retail merchants. Overwhelmingly, these are small business owners. It was a huge hit as well to tax revenue. And it's forcing everyday Virginians that are trying to do everything right. They're paying more every time they go to the store, and that's just wrong.
The problem is certainly there, and I love the political side of this, the communication aspect. That's a very simple message, right? That the people who are committing the crimes are the ones who should be paying for it, not everyone else who ends up paying for it. But can you tell us a little bit more about the approach you had to ORC, what your administration has actually done, the steps you've taken, and the things you've been able to implement to combat organized retail crime?
Well, listen, I am a big believer. I tell my staff all the time that 90% of life's problems can be traced to either poor or miscommunication. And the best way to fight bad information is with good information. And so I'm a big believer in working in a collaborative style. So I think it was important from the beginning to get the stakeholders in the room to have some discussions. So we had a organized retail crime task force of both people in government and out of government. I've often said one of the problems with government is it can oftentimes act in a very clumsy manner. And this was a measure twice, cut once moment. And so we got both the Virginia Retail Federation, the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys, both law enforcement, National Federation of Independent Business, some of our huge big box, Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart and Amazon. We had representatives of work get together in a room to talk about what could this look like, and to identify the problem. Where is this problem coming from? And so, the good news is everybody that we reach out to was interested to recognize it was a problem. And sometimes, candidly, in public policy, it's hard to get people to recognize there even is a problem. And I think one of the problems you have in government is too often, government is the only where they measure success by their intentions, not by their results, right? Nobody in the private sector could operate that way. Nobody in a sports team could operate that way. Nobody in the military could operate that way. But sometimes we find that in government, they want to measure success by their intentions. And so we wanted to see what are the numbers, and do you recognize there's a problem? And are you willing to work with us and different elected leaders in Virginia on a bipartisan basis to try to solve the problem? And I'm grateful for it. But listen, I was a former prosecutor early in my career. I'm a big believer there's no such thing as a victimless crime. If you're a small business owner and you're the first to get to your retail shop in the morning. You're the last to leave at night. And you're trying to figure out in this post-COVID world how to keep the doors open and how to find employees. And you're losing 10 to 15% of your merchandise to theft. That's not a victimless crime. That is absolutely impacting you. And we know that 2/3 of all new jobs created in America are created by small business owners. And so many of the people I was also hearing wasn't just the big box retailers. It was the small business folks. It was the mom and pops. A lot of them were immigrants. A lot of them were individuals that came here with a dream and they were supplying for their family. And they were seeing, in particularly in some localities with local district attorneys that were refusing to prosecute larceny crimes, they have essentially legalized theft. And that has a devastating consequences, particularly for the small business owners. So we're very, very, very grateful for the people that came together on this.
General, I love that. A lot of times we go after solutions in a siloed environment. The collaboration that you had with these different groups is something that's really unique. I'd love to understand a little bit about how those diverse perspectives, right? You talked about legislators and retailers. I'm sure you had trade groups and law enforcement. How did that diverse perspective help contribute to the final legislation?
I think it was very helpful. I mean, candidly, you have some pretty big corporate rivals. If you know anything in the business world, there's a rivalry obviously between Home Depot and Lowe's, but there's also a rivalry between a lot of the traditional brick and mortars and Amazon. Very, very different business models in many ways. And then you've also had some friction in the past between small retailers like the National Federation of Independent Businesses and the big box. And so what we thought it was important is to get everybody in a room. We're going to treat everybody with respect, and we're going to spitball different ideas. And some ideas, as you can imagine, one entity liked, and other ideas others didn't like. But it was important for everybody to recognize the stakeholders, recognize that we're in this digital world. When you're living through history, you don't necessarily recognize you're living through history. The reality is, COVID is one of those moments that people are going to be studying and analyzing for generations because it fundamentally changed in many ways how Americans live, how Americans work, how they purchase their goods, and in some ways how they're educated. It had an absolutely dramatic impact on American society, and it's going to be analyzed for quite some time. And one of the things that had happened is it rapidly accelerated a long-term trend of online retail. And then also, in our opinion, it was important for the big box retailers to understand how important it was from the law enforcement community of what we were facing. Because what we have seen is that organized criminal elements, those that are heavily, the largest criminal enterprise on the global scale is narcotics trafficking. The second largest criminal enterprise on the global scale is human trafficking. A lot of these individuals would go to communities or areas, say, where they have a district attorney that won't prosecute larceny-related crime. They're trafficking in human beings, and they're trafficking in fentanyl, and they're trafficking in narcotics. Well, they will view this as a way to supplement their criminal enterprise. And so oftentimes they're using this to help fund and expand their network in the human trafficking realm, for exactly. So, you have somebody that you have suspect, or you have a confidential informant that's telling you this person is a major narcotics dealer or a major human trafficker. Maybe it's hard to get them on that, but law enforcement is basically saying, but we can get them on this. We can get them on organized retail crime. And oftentimes that happens as a prosecutor. You necessarily can't get them on the other charges, but if you can get them on this. So I thought it was important for them to also hear, those in the retail space, for them to understand this is not just about organized retail crime. This is also about some of the worst criminal enterprises on the planet that are making their way into Virginia. We know that Sinaloa has now made some inroads into Virginia, and so you need to be wary of that. And this is why we need some tools in the toolbox for law enforcement to be able to use to go after these entities.
So you recognize that there's a big problem. You understand how it's woven together, where it's not just organized retail crime in a silo. You bring a lot of people together and you pass legislation. We talked about a few like the punishment-related changes. Are there any other specifics related to the approach that you've had in the Commonwealth of Virginia, or the legislation that was passed? That would be good for our audience to understand some of those specifics.
We passed a law that essentially was an organized retail crime law that really allowed you to go after the individuals that were stealing retail merchandise of value exceeding $5,000 in a 90-day period, made it a Class 3 felony. So there were some laws that made changes in Virginia. Remember what I said about people measure success by intentions rather than results. There were some laws that were made that changed before Governor Youngkin and I came into office that really changed our larceny laws. They doubled petty larceny to $1,000, but they also got rid of a law that was on the book that said petty larceny third was a felony. In other words, if you're convicted a third time of petty larceny, you could be charged with a felony. And it was a very effective tool by law enforcement to go after individuals that were really conducting themselves in an organized retail crime manner. There was no way Benjamin Franklin said that politics is the art of the possible. There's no way in a closely divided assembly that we were able to get petty larceny third back on the books. But what we could do is specifically address the issue of organized retail crime and push for legislation that would try to give a tool in the toolbox for law enforcement. So if the value exceeds $5,000 in a 90-day period, you're convicted of a class 3 felony, which is a crime eligible up to 20 years in prison. I'm a big believer that there needs to be consequences for their action. Everybody, obviously they make mistakes. You want to make sure you have some room there. But if you're part of an organized retail criminal element, there need to be consequences, and there needs to be a message as well, because what we found talking to both confidential informants and those that are dealing with the organized crime, these are very, very smart, sophisticated operatives. Sometimes we have this mindset that just because they're engaging in a life of illegal conduct that somehow they're not intelligent or they're not sophisticated. They're very, very sophisticated. They know exactly where you have a local district attorney that has announced they will not prosecute larceny crimes in the name of, quote, social justice. And the reality is roughly and studies after studies have shown this, but roughly 3 to 5% of felons commit over 50% of the violent crime. So if you want to go after crime, you have to go through those 3 to 5% repeat offenders. And so I think this is an important toolbox. I also think it was important for us, as you look at what happened in Virginia leading up to this, is what did other states do? Thomas Jefferson called the states the laboratories of democracy, right? And I think that's one of the great brilliance of our federal system is so much, obviously a lot of power is designated to the federal government, but so much power is designated at the state level, particularly with your state criminal code, that we're able to see what are they doing in Florida, in Illinois, and Georgia, and Arkansas. I was on the phone with Attorney General Moody in Florida to get her ideas, because they've done a lot in the organized retail crime space, and then also look in North Carolina and others and get those best practices and bring those ideas. And so, this bill was a result of a very collaborative effort. But it also just recognized another issue was we have to modernize our laws. The bad guys always tend to be a step ahead of us sometimes. This is a way to modernize our laws and recognize that this is something that law enforcement has been asking for. And we're really proud to be able to give them that tool.
I like what you said there real quickly about them being not unintelligent. I would think of it sometimes they've got high business acumen and they've gone into a really unregulated industry. They can kind of move so fluidly and make adjustments to that. That's a really interesting point.
It's a very interesting point. We've seen it across the board that they're smarter than you think they are. General, you talk about best practices, and a lot of states are trying to find their way as it relates to ORC. We love the advantage of hindsight. Do you have any recommendations for other AGs or even retailers as they're looking to address ORC, things that have worked? Do you have any recommendations for that audience?
Well, listen, this is what I would say is I think it's so important that democracy is a participatory sport. And so if you're a small business owner, if you are involved, you don't have the option of sitting on the sidelines. You need to engage your respective state house, state assembly, and your state attorney general. So much of what we can do, and listen, every state is different, right? There are 48 elected attorney generals throughout the country. Tennessee's AG is appointed by their Supreme Court, and in New Hampshire, it's a cabinet position in the governor's cabinet. Other than that, it's an elected position, but their jurisdiction also is different. So I have about a dozen plus areas of original or concurrent jurisdiction in criminal law. But there's a host of areas that I don't have. And so every AG is going to have that. I've talked to some other AGs that have zero jurisdiction over criminal law. What that really means is you need to have engagement. you're either, whether it's with your Chamber of Commerce or your independent retailers, you need to be engaging your legislators. And particularly if you're a small business owner listening, this is something that I have found, particularly with my friends on the other side of the aisle, is they constantly think that retail crime it only harms the big guys, the Walmarts, the Lowe's. And as I said earlier, the reality is those aren't the job creators in this country. It's the small business owners. And one thing we've always stressed, the people that are testifying in committee is not Lowe's. It's not Home Depot. It's not Walmart. It's the individual that came here with 2 nickels on their pocket and from El Salvador, and now they've started a retail shop and they can't keep their doors open, right? And I think it's so important for legislators to see the power of the testimony of an individual saying, no, we've changed some of the laws in Virginia, and you've made it more permissive. Whether you intended to or not, the reality is it's now hurting me. I know you didn't intend to. I know those weren't your intentions. But the reality is it's hurting me now. And I think I can't stress enough that the world is run by those that show up. And you have to be able to participate and collaborate. If you're not involved in your local Chamber of Commerce or the NFIB, you need to. If you don't have plans to reach out, have a meeting with, and talk to your local elected, you need to. And I think that's the most important thing. I think apathy is the great poison pill of our time. And I just say you have to reject apathy. Yes, it's hard work. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it's going to take time away from your business. But it's a critical moment where leaders need to step up and be active and be engaged and communicate.
Yeah.
General, we have the luxury of seeing the lens of all 50 states. We service retailers in all 50 states, and so we get to see the impacts of ORC. Your comments about it's not a victimless crime are so true. My family shops in these stores. We go to public schools. A lot of the effects affect each of us. So when we say thank you, General, sincerely thank you for your work in fighting back against ORC. It's phenomenal work. It's worthy work. Your story's amazing. We're grateful for the time you spent with us this morning.
Great to be with you all. Have a great Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all of y'all.
You as well.
Thank you. God bless.
That's it for this episode of Retail's Most Wanted. Thanks to our presenting sponsors at LVT and, of course, the Attorney General Alliance. Don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button so you can catch each new episode. We're also on Twitter. You can find us at Retail's Most Want. So type the name of the show and stop a little bit early. We're on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. You can find the links in the show notes below. Thanks for being with us, everyone, and keep up the good fight.